Tonight, we investigate a decision which affects more than half the West's council taxpayers. Two local authorities and the region's biggest police force have handed over local services and the 1,400 people who provide them to a private company. That decision's to cost £500 million over the next decade.
We have a 10-year plan here at Somerset based on what we know will happen if this contract succeeds. The contract, of course, has to succeed. We will make it succeed.
The public out there who pay us a lot of money through their council tax are not going to see very much difference at all.
They talk about social transformation of Taunton, Somerset and the South West. We've seen absolutely nothing, no evidence whatsoever that that will happen.
Tonight, West Eye View asks, can South West 1 deliver on its promise to regenerate Somerset and the wider region, or will it turn out to be a very costly experiment? The contract was signed at the offices of this Bristol law firm in the early hours of Saturday, September the 29th last year. In a deal worth more than £500 million of public money, the region's biggest county signed up with the global computer giant IBM. And South West 1, a unique joint venture pioneering a new way of delivering local services, was born. Somerset is the 7th biggest county in Britain and promotes itself as the jewel of the South West. It's home to more than 500,000 people. But despite being rated a 4-star authority, Somerset's County Council and its 5 smaller district councils were finding it increasingly difficult to make ends meet.
We were forever salami slicing. You know, let's nip a bit off here in order to pay for a bit more there. Let's slice a bit off of that service in order to be able to boost that service a little bit. And you can't go on like that.
The ISIS, or Improving Services in Somerset project, was created by the ruling Liberal Democrats to tackle the growing financial challenge. The big idea was that back-office services like human resources, property management, information technology, reception and procurement could be managed differently and for less money.
What about a big joint venture? A joint venture with a global player, somebody who's had experience in every sector of the economy and every continent, and a company that can bring in investment in skills that we don't have.
Working with the private sector is nothing new in local government. What makes this project unique was Somerset County Council's decision to join forces with a district council, Taunton Deane, and Avon and Somerset Police.
It's not only two-tier, ourselves and Taunton Deane, it's cross-sectoral. It involves another part of the public sector. But we also thought, why don't we see if we can break the mould with this? Why would Plymouth or Cornwall, or for that matter Wiltshire or Dorset, have to do this themselves from scratch? Why don't we see if we can create a framework into which they can come without competition and without cost?
The ISIS vision was not without its critics.
We were getting more and more concerned because we thought there were other ways of improving services in Somerset than going into a joint venture company. And one of the options we were very keen on is in-house service improvement plans, but we felt at the time that they'd already made their mind up without any consultation.
No, we hadn't dismissed anything. What we were doing was looking at options. I mean, I was really attracted to the idea of a joint venture because of the reasons I've just given, that we simply didn't have those skills in-house.
We're all in favour of better efficiency and value for money in local authorities. No one would dispute that, but it's the way that we were going to go forward, and we had concerns that these type of joint venture companies allow the corporatisation and the big companies to get into local government, and once they're in, then you know what are you actually voting for.
So concerned was Unison that the union employed a consultant to examine ISIS.
There's a 1 in 10 chance that the project will fail, and there are other issues about, yes, you know, you can draw on the private sector advice and expertise. Nobody's against that. But the question is, how do you do that? And I would argue very strongly that that is best done by an in-house service. But Somerset were not interested in this. It's my strong view that, you know, the option of going down this route was decided before they ever wrote the outline business case.
We still had a very thorough exercise looking at the options before we finally, having consulted unions, staff, council members, partners and others, before we finalised on a joint venture.
Concerns were also expressed about the person hired to run the ISIS project.
Sue Barnes was a very effective Director of Resources in Suffolk, and Sue happens to be married to Colin Port, who is the Chief Constable of Avon and Somerset Constabulary. She came in to add additional weight, really, to make sure that the high-level contract discussions with the prospective bidders were going well. And she did a damn good job for us.
However, Susan Barnes's appointment was criticised in the Whitfield report. It concluded that, although there was no suggestion of any financial gain by Susan Barnes or her husband, there was a potential conflict of interest, a criticism also made in Parliament.
Her name is Sue Barnes. In fact, she's a constituent of mine. She also happens to be married to Mr. Colin Port, the Chief Constable of the Avon and Somerset Police. At best, this is an uncomfortable coincidence.
I'm absolutely certain it never became any kind of conflict of interest. You know, Sue is a very, very professional officer. She was not allowed into any detailed negotiations about the police and police numbers, and she wasn't allowed in any discussions between ourselves and the police about our own negotiation. If anybody wanted to hold up a red flag about this particular issue, they could have, and nobody did.
Susan Barnes, the Chief Constable's wife, would be paid over £200,000 during the last months she was running ISIS. But her salary wasn't the only controversial aspect of her appointment. Early last year, a critical stage had been reached, with 3 bidders all competing for the huge contract: BT, Capita and IBM. At this highly sensitive time, an event took place which, for legal reasons, we can't discuss.
There was a meeting. That meeting and the concerns that I'd have about that meeting are evidence before the Standards Board, and therefore I'm unfortunately not able to talk about it.
However, others feel less inhibited about discussing the impact the meeting had on the Council's then Deputy Leader, Paul Buchanan.
Last April, Alan Jones reported Councillor Paul Buchanan to the Standards Board. There were no less than 50, Mr. Deputy Speaker, trumped-up charges against that man. As a direct result, Jones silenced his most powerful internal critic. The Standards Board, inexcusably, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is still wading through them. This is a dreadful system that has permitted a brutal injustice.
How usual is it for a chief executive to make complaints, formal complaints to the Standards Board for England about a member of an authority?
It's not very unusual at all. It's the chief executive's duty to be the last man or woman standing if complaints are made about a member.
You, I think, laid something like 6 dozen complaints against Councillor Buchanan.
Where did that figure come from?
Most of which were rejected out of hand. The Standards Board looked at 11 of them, and you and Councillor Buchanan, I believe, were told at the beginning of this year that it was the Standards Board's view that he should be cleared of all the complaints.
Look, I'm not going to be drawn into a discussion about what the Standards Board have said, but let me tell you that what you just told me is incorrect.
That verdict has never been published because you then promptly laid a whole load more complaints against him.
Well, I can imagine where you got that information from, because there is at least one individual, I think there are at least 2 individuals who are alleging that that's the case. That is false. I wrote the letter and I attached the evidence. The evidence was gathered from a large number of people who supplied it willingly.
Paul Buchanan declined to be interviewed for this programme, citing the continuing Standards Board inquiry. In a statement, he said,
"Unlike the Chief Executive Officer of Somerset County Council, I'm unable to comment on any aspect of the dozens of allegations he's made, as they're still under investigation. It's clearly unhelpful to the process and to natural justice to speculate or comment on any possible outcomes."
In the last year, Councillor Buchanan, Deputy Leader of the ruling Liberal Democrats, has been removed from the group and from all positions of influence.
Why is Councillor Buchanan, who was Deputy Leader, he was Portfolio Holder for Economic Development, currently effectively in the political wilderness?
Councillor Buchanan's no longer a member of my group. I'm not prepared to talk about why he's no longer a member of my group, because it's the subject of a Standards Board inquiry, and the Standards Board have asked me to keep it confidential.
Are you confident that you would have won if he hadn't had a Standards Board inquiry hanging over him?
I'm not prepared to talk about the inner workings of my group. What I am prepared to say is that we had a democratic election within our group, and I won. I'm the best person for the job. My group voted me in as the best person for the job, and I have delivered for them in this last 12 months, and I will continue to do that for as long as they want me.
Negotiations continued in spite of the turmoil inside County Hall, and in March last year, a preferred bidder was chosen, the American multinational IBM. As long as the deal could be closed, the stage was now set for the creation of South West One, and in September last year, after a couple more months' delay, it finally was. After the break, we'll look at how this joint venture company plans to deliver on its promises, and how it continues to be overshadowed by a controversy that simply won't go away.
South West One is an outfit born in secrecy,
with all the details hidden from most of us councillors.
Somerset County Council, Taunton Deane Borough Council and Avon Somerset Police all believe South West One, their new joint venture company with IBM, will deliver better services over the next 10 years for less money.
We've taken a lot of services that we were presently providing from within this council on our own, and we've packaged them up and lifted them wholesale and put them into South West One. Okay? But we've done that at a lesser cost than it was costing us before.
Your staff are still, employed on the same terms and conditions that they were when they were working directly for the county council. So how is it now costing less to just move them into this new company?
Because that's what the contract was. That's the deal that we've struck.
Taunton Deane Borough Council and the other public sector partners all claim that simply by signing up with South West One, they're saving money. In the case of the County Council, this is put at £1.7 million a year for each of the 10 years of the contract. And yet, all 1,400 members of staff are to have their jobs safeguarded and all their terms and conditions of employment honoured. Small wonder, therefore, that critics of the scheme can't get their heads around how, or even whether, the sums stack up.
There is going to be job loss as part of this project. These projects reduce jobs. At least, probably 15, 20, 25% of jobs will go.
The deal we've got with IBM as part of South West One is not a single post will be made redundant. Not one. Everybody's job is guaranteed.
But if they leave, will they be replaced?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question. That's a matter for the company to judge, and if they leave, then maybe the company won't replace that post.
South West One's partners say savings could come from better use of existing buildings.
Why would you want to go to the police station in order to present your documents when you could do that at the council offices? Could you provide better service, more integrated from the customer's point of view, in one place and at less cost?
A key feature of the deal is new information technology. The SAP software system, which claims to make business processes more efficient, is being introduced by IBM. Avon Somerset Police has high hopes for it, expecting it to result in
a saving equivalent to a minimum of 24 officers' time, which we're hoping to increase to 40.
SAP was also the cornerstone of a deal in Bradford between the council there and IBM. The original cost of the project, known as Bradford Eye, was £158 million over 10 years. 3 years in, that cost has risen by at least £12 million.
What we had was a very standard service, and that anything extra you wanted to do was bolted on and had to be paid for by the council. That means, in effect, that we've got an additional £3.5 million per year that we're spending on things that we believed in the first instance were and should have been in the principal contract price.
Unison has also been vocal in condemning Bradford Eye, claiming its members are being put under severe pressure. An allegation on which IBM declined to comment.
The issues for staff today are increased stress levels. There is a blame culture that operates within IBM. If something goes wrong or there's some failure that they don't hit a performance indicator target, then they'll look to the individual to see why didn't we hit that.
My focus has not been on authorities where they've made mistakes, other than where we can learn from those authorities. It's my understanding from Bradford that they are saying that you cannot compare what they have, Bradford Eye, with South West One. For a start, Bradford Eye isn't a joint venture company. I would accept that they have the same operating system.
Professor Whitfield believes the comparison is quite legitimate. He's not convinced South West One has learned necessary lessons from Bradford.
I've seen nothing. They talk about social transformation of Taunton, Somerset and the South West. We've seen absolutely nothing, no evidence whatsoever that that will happen. We've seen no evidence because the whole thing is shrouded in total secrecy.
This claim of excessive secrecy has been levelled at all the partners in South West One. They've tried to keep secret the fine detail of the business plan and the contract. Only those who've signed a confidentiality agreement can find out how IBM proposes to deliver on its promises. Although in one case, even that made no difference.
Although I'd signed a confidentiality agreement, it stripped out all the commercially confidential information. I've never ever divulged confidential information, and I never will, because that would just be, cutting my own throat to do that.
Every time I've asked questions, freedom of information questions, access questions, openness questions, I've been refuted all the way along.
This case is absolutely unique. I've never seen anything like it in 35 years.
The concerns are echoed by a Taunton Deane Borough Councillor who stood alone in his opposition to South West One. Presumably you've seen the full business case for the transfer.
No, I don't know anybody who's seen the full business case. As I understand it, they've kept that under lock and key. Well, already we're being told that we're going to have to dip into reserves to cover an overspend. We had a report in April pointing out that even at the end of last year, in December last year, because of the higher than expected costs for consultants, legal fees and so on, there was going to be an overspend on our budget for the year just gone.
Since that interview was recorded, Taunton Deane Council has admitted taking £130,000 out of its reserves. This was on top of the £120,000 it had already set aside to cover the cost of setting up South West One. In spite of the overspend, Taunton Deane says a majority of councillors feel South West One is good news.
One of the key aims includes providing better value for money for council taxpayers and improved access to service for our customers. Progress is already being made in both of those areas.
£500 million of public funds.
Unison has been a fierce critic of secrecy.
This is now formally a request for you to disclose the full business case to the trade unions.
In order to get more information, the union has lodged dozens of requests under the Freedom of Information Act.
One thing that I'm not too happy about is the number of freedom of information requests which they have been making in the recent times, which currently amount to 33 individual questions over 7 detailed letters. Unison are indeed diverting valuable resources and attention from running this contract at an important time.
The easy solution is for them to actually give us the contract so we can analyse it ourselves and then take a view.
Industrial relations have worsened to such a point that Unison is taking both councils to an employment tribunal over an alleged lack of consultation. The contract to create South West One was signed in the early hours of a Saturday morning. Unison was faxed details of the staffing agreement just hours before, after everyone had gone home.
Who was the council expecting to be in the Unison office just before 8 o'clock on a Friday evening?
Okay, can I just be clear with you that the staff agreement was one of those documents that we had been sharing with Unison right the way through the process. But obviously, on the very last few days, there were 1 or 2 amendments made to the staff agreement, and it was those amendments that were faxed through. They knew we were locked into these negotiations, that if they were that concerned, they would have been in the office waiting to have those last bits of paper sent to them.
Somerset County Council brushes off allegations that it's been secretive.
The governance of this particular process from getting towards its original inception to signing the deal as we did in September as one that has been subject to the utmost scrutiny, not only by external auditors, but also scrutiny who have received reports and updates on the progress with South West One on about 6 separate occasions, not to mention the number of times that the Executive Board has done that.
Taunton Deane Council, however, says some details must be kept secret.
In any commercial business arrangement or any business contract, there will be commercially sensitive information. To ignore this standard business procedure would damage both the council's reputation and any potential future opportunities for work with the private sector.
Until last week, no member of the public had seen the full business case or contract for South West One. However, West Eye View, a forensic accountant, and leading critic Ian Liddell-Grainger used open government rules to gain access to the business case. Although key elements of the contracts were withheld during our inspection of the authority's accounts, following a last-minute request from IBM. A decision we've warned we're prepared to challenge in court.
The lack of information was quite surprising, really. Being my profession, I sort of see this from an audit perspective all the time. No, not enough information at all.
How easy do you think it would be, given our experience today, for an elected councillor to try and make some sense of that South West One contract and try and hold the authority accountable over it?
Well, from the information I've seen today, to make any judgment on that contract for an ordinary layman councillor would be very hard to do. Today I've not seen anything that would help me make a decision as to whether it was a good or a bad contract to enter into.
I'm not happy with what I've seen so far. I certainly know what I've seen in the time that I've been here. I'm even less happy, because not only does it look as though this was the most expensive deal they took, it looks as though it's the worst deal. That is a bad thing for taxpayers. It is a bad thing for the people of Somerset.
While South West One's partners acknowledge their joint venture is risky, 33 other authorities are eligible to join. If it's a success, IBM could end up providing backroom services to public bodies from local councils in Cornwall to health authorities in Gloucestershire, even Exmoor's National Park Authority. But it remains a controversial vision.
I think that we'll look back on it and we will say it was the best thing we ever did. And this council will be beyond excellence at that point because of what we've done with South West One. There's always risk where there is innovation. You know, it's like sailing a sailing ship close to the wind, you know, that's where innovation lives, but that's also where chaos resides.
That was the last film in the current series of West Eye View.